180 degrees, and you're getting kind of a decomposition whenever you're regarding their point of view. So that was a painting from around that time. And then this is a little polychrome sculpture. And I say this is more like an object or an assemblage. And I formed the pieces of wood and put them together. Some of them are actually found in the middle of that upper portion. There is actually a turned wood ornament from a staircase that I found. And if you can see it in the view, the vertical image is you can see it as a telephone hole insulator sort of peeking out from the back of that little stripe spotted leg there. And I thought of this as kind of a bottom feeding fish. And so anyway, these are the things that I was doing. Carnegie was an interesting place. They didn't tell you much in terms of, particularly painting instruction. And I had a paint teacher that was actually very influential, but he was, I think his whole strategy was to put you in an existential crisis. I did have actually a very good instructor in drawing them. I mean, to tell you the truth, he didn't tell you much either, but he would give you little hints towards things. And a lot of his things maybe posts based on informed by cues and kind of drawing where you're very aware of the top surface of things and maybe looking down. But anyway, I would split my practice between doing the paintings like I just showed you, and then in the afternoon I might go out and do a watercolor from the landscape. And this is an example of one of those. So, I got out of undergraduate school, and it was basically it was a mess. And I realized that I didn't do, and I didn't really know how to paint from the observed world. And wouldn't it be nice to know how to do that? And I had a bunch of crazy jobs. I was a cab driver. I worked as a deckhand on towboats in Pittsburgh, and then I worked in a sign shop. But I mean, I gradually gravitated towards artists that I just thought were interesting. I spent a lot of time going back and forth with DC in this period, and really became very interested and acquainted with particularly the work of going on in New York. I chased a girlfriend to Boston after undergraduate school, and there were two really amazing exhibitions at the Porter, and they were like all of the major works and all the major figurative works, which was really Porter had who died really just a few years earlier, in 1975. But I think a lot of the museum collections that we have, some of these like paintings, we're probably buying it out of the show. It was really a great treat to see them all together. And I just really they seem so fresh and direct, and I really admired that. And then the funny thing is, I think Porter had gone through a similar sort of experience when he had seen a VR exhibition in the 30s. So anyway, this that sort of directness, freshness, and the larger pieces, I really admired the scale of them too, because they were that sort of at that scale, and it was practicing what they do. And what you did, it was just they were bigger paintings, 5 or 6, and they could kind of walk. And my assumption, I think at the time, was the painting that, like on the painting on the right, the scale, the assumption was they were all there, and it was a painting. And as time has gone on, and doing this myself, I sort of wondered about that, and so I don't know for sure. I maybe I think it's supposed to be the fortune names. I became a big admirer of Philip Gus. When I first saw these things, after being familiar with his paintings, from the 50s that are so kind of lyrical and stuff like that. And I read a great book, which I think has probably been transformed into Philip Gus in a critical study, but when I read it, it was called Yes, But. And it's really a great, I mean, Custom is a great talker and, but had really interesting ideas about things. There's so many interesting stories and people he had been teaching BU. So I knew people that didn't have it. And so there was just, but Custom made a big impression on me. And I don't have images from Strategy. I went there 2 summers in 1979 and 1980. And I had applied with things that I had done from one and stuff, and I continued to do that when I was up there. And when the people I met up there was Don, the wonderful painter. Again, one of these, it was a very strange thing to say this, but in many ways I consider myself a self-taught painter. But anyway, Lois was a wonderful person sat there, talk to you. It wasn't like she would show you much, but she was like just a great example. And, I can see, how nicely and she would set up in this really organized way with doll, with stand oil and just the same way of doing stuff. And she was just out there doing it. And then I actually applied to grad schools in 82 and I ended up going there. And I went to Brooklyn. And which is kind of a great experience in itself. I mean, New York itself is really kind of fun way of grad school, but a wonderful. There was a huge retirement a year or 2 after I left, and then they also had wonderful art history teachers, Michael Mallory and Jack Slam. But and I did take painting with Leonard first semester, which was really, again, the only instructional painting class I've ever had, and it wasn't doing much instruction. And class with Leonard, this is actually, I don't know if I did this actually in class, but it was around the time I was in class with Leonard. This is actually a painting of the painter Jackie Lehman, who posed for our class. But, the usual kinds of things that came in Leonard's class were, the gospel about kind of tonal thinking and trying to, think with the paint rather than draw first and that kind of thing. Basically come out of the Hopper painting book. And, there's a direct connection to all this stuff because Leonard had spent some time studying with it and stuff. So, two big influences for everyone really in Brooklyn at this time were Dickinson, which again has that kind of tonal orientation that is key to that way of painting where you're doing it. Somebody that I had been aware of, but became more deeply interested in is Mirandi. Anyhow, let's see what's going on here. Oh, this is how it's painted with the brush. Like acrylic painting, actually. And it is kind of a rector ruined city, I suppose. And around this time, it's the Reagan administration, and there was an arms race going on between the U.S. and the Soviet Union, and we thought we might be incinerated at any moment. So, but these are the paintings that I was doing in these kind of abstract forms in this ruined city. But again, sort of a split personality there. But I had an opportunity to travel to Italy right after graduate school. And it was a fellow, David Fakemeyer, who taught in a printmaking program run by a conceptual artist, Louis Anderson. And he had bought an old farmhouse and he was fixing it up. And this is a good example of one of the watercolors I did there on the left. And on the right is the portrait of Vicky Maggio, who was the shop tech for the print shop. And a lot of the stuff that had been sort of discussed in my class of like tonal kind of things, and kind of directly painting and comparing things and that kind of all that stuff seemed to kick in that summer. Oh, anyway, those are examples of that. And I went back and started doing this again. So this is about about 5 feet across, I suppose. I continued in that vein where I was doing the abstract paintings. Neo-expressionism was going on. I was very influenced, I think, probably by lots of my classmates from graduate school. And so we all seem to get involved in that. This is another example of one of those kinds of paintings. I had a whole series of abstract paintings that was kind of running towards them. And so that's what, this is a walking torso, I guess, and it's kind of deeply perspectival space. This is about 16. Gradually made my way into painting things again. And particularly I had a bunch of natural forms. And like the object on the right, obviously, is a little crayon claw. The object on the left is of acorns with the nuts falling out. But anyway, one of us started noticing is that, gee, they started looking blank. And but I mean, as he was mentioning before, it's that you sort of, if you're doing everything from your imagination, maybe it needs to be refreshed. Or maybe it's even more interesting. But I started, well, also at this time, there were a couple of things that also pushed me back in figuration, I suppose. There was one big show. I mean, really, really stupendous. I mean, it had everything, and the sculpture and the early stuff and the late stuff. I had different genres like the jockey and horse scenes and stuff like that. It was really, really quite an exhibition. So anyway, and eventually I just sort of gave up the abstract painting altogether. And so I did a series of the paintings of the natural forms, and then there were some other paintings I did after that. So here's the natural form painting of the crown claw and the acorn tops. And there's a painting at the Carnegie Institute when I was a kid that I would see that absolutely terrified me. It was a James Ensor on the temptation of seeing meditating in the desert, and he's sort of kind of harassed by all these demons that are pressing about him. And but I thought of this whole situation as also maybe something similar to the state sort of pushing in on the objects. The objects having a certain kind of character. But these are, that one was probably about 11 by 14. This is in 60 by 20. None of them are very big. But this is actually a theme that I come back to. This is a not that one. And so it's something that still continues to interest me, and I still collect these kinds of objects. I saw a show of Jasper Jones' drawings around this time, and I was interested in pop art of John's and got it, and he did it from high school. But the drawing show was really, really good. And one of the things that occurred to me as I was going through the show was one of the things that was interesting about John's is that he would gravitate toward and paint things that it was very ambiguous about what their identity was. Like he would do a painting of a flag, and does it this completely flat thing. Is it really a flag or is it a painting of a flag? So it's sort of one of those things. Numbers, any number of things like that. And I thought, okay, what kind of thing could I do that is similar to that? And what I decided to do was to arrange objects against the field of camouflage fabric. And so I did a series of paintings that were based on that. And they were odd objects. I mean, the baby model got the little cool pills. There's a mouse traps and roach traps. But the idea is upended flat. That was interesting to me. And then I did a similar sort of thing with these other kinds of situations where, again, out of the John's sort of book is maybe the John's kind of idea that you have kind of a predetermined composition, and which would be like a placing, where you have all the different things that you have in a placing. But in this case, there's also a Victorian mirror and a little wine glass. This is a painting I did around this time. And these the arrangements were getting complicated enough that it was almost kind of difficult for me to keep track of them. And what I started to do was I got a big sheet of plexiglass and I scratched and threw it into it. And I sort of tried to select it out of the drawer thing, you know. And I was trying to keep my, viewpoint pretty steady and doing it, and it helped me, get the angles down. You can actually see in this painting is a bit corresponding grid underneath that kind of comes through a little bit. So here's an example of one of those paintings. And here's a variation on it. And I thought of the bow as being kind of a fulcrum for almost like a teeter-totter kind of situation. Again, this is probably about 4 feet across. And then I continued that series. A variation on that was to create these little dioramas and stage settings, and stage curtains. But yeah, you can see a little stage set of the curtains on either side. And here is another version of that. The title of this one is Day and Night, and I actually, painted on the still life on the left or the day, and the portion on the right at night. If you remember from Gabe's presentation, is that there's a figure walking down the steps. There's a painting up on the wall. That's it. So, and this is about 6 feet across. So, the whole thing with the arranged still lifes and all that, it was something that was close to abstract painting, but it was somehow informed and by real objects that had an abstract movement. So we moved to Bloomington, and he got the job in '96. And, lots of things became possible. The things opened up a little bit when we got to Bloomington. Anyway, I've always drawn. I'd like to draw. And one of the things that became possible was, working for models again. First of all, what they were being paid was what I could afford at film funding. And then the other thing was that there would be open model sessions and stuff. And so I started drawing the figure again. And so here's some examples and drawings for that. And also drawing interior spaces of where we were living. This is actually the house that we ended up owning. The dining room and the living room of that house. And so I started doing these drawings of the space where we were living. And I thought, it'd be interesting maybe, if there were a figure in these situations. So I decided to do paintings of these spaces and brought a model in and anyway. So this is the in Bloomington. And the figure is, it's not, painting the new figure is not a big part of what I do, but I did do it a few times. And, it was important to try it, I suppose. And this again is another person that hosts for the crew. And so at the bottom of those steps where each painting was set. I looked at this, had this painting around for a long time. And I said, there's really something familiar about this. And I realized what it is. It's the pose of the day, but only it's a mirror image of it. And this is actually a study of our bedroom in that house on Lincoln Street. And about 20 inches across. And what I ended up doing is using it as a setting to do this painting. And what I ended up doing is I did this in a studio on campus. And but I had the study, and I set, and the truth of it, I kept bringing things from our house, bringing them into the studio, which is something that I've done before. And set up many things that were similar to it. With shy of that dresser, which stayed at home. but got the model of house. I remember measuring with the tape measure how high the door, the door was. So, here is something that if you never lived in the Midwest, something that you're probably not familiar with. The landscape here is really beautiful and very rolling and very, set up by water. And when you go out to any place west of Ohio, it's a different kind of landscape. And this is due to the land ordinance 1785, which is older than the Constitution, but it is what they came up with is a system first in the land, breaking, the new land that people were moving to, and breaking it down into counties and townships. In fact, the townships they have a real regularity about them. They're 6 miles by 6 miles, and then they're broken down into units of 36 sections. And in fact, one of the things that they strategically would do is that Square 16 is going to be a schoolhouse. And then they had actually set aside a couple of squares to give land to Revolutionary War veterans. And there were other kinds of things too. But it's like a real regularity to this stuff when you go out, west of Pennsylvania. And it's one of the reasons why all roads are parallel. It's straight to the side of our house. I mean, the sun was set at the end of it. It wasn't an accident. So anyway, so that's how the landscape has been affected out where we live. And then the other thing that's happened, and I did notice that actually a lot of the architecture here is a similar sort of thing. So it's bungalow arts and crafts architecture. And at the time, what you could do is you could order a house through the Sears and Roebuck catalog. And it would be delivered on a railroad car, and you basically put it together. And the bungalows, the influences of the architecture from, again, American arts, crafts, and switch chalets, that kind of thing. And our house is not actually a Sears home, but it looks very much like the house in the lower right there. So I got to Bloomington and I did a lot of landscapes around town. And a variety of sizes. This one happens to be about 18 by 24. The goal would be to do it in one sitting, but I would never really quite do it. I didn't have to go back to it a few times. This one's a little larger, 22 by 30. Remember this painting, and particularly the thing has the little to us. And most of them are about this size, if you're about 12 or 15. And this is the neighbor 2 houses away from us. Remember this one, this is behind our house. We're over that porch. And then these were the neighbors behind us. Judy Sylvester, who lived in the house to the right. This other name of Judy's house. And her house would be there. So what I ended up doing is really doing a lot of paintings that were set in our house on Lincoln Street. And so these are basically a tour of the house. People in the kitchen making coffee. I've heard a description of Balthus paintings. Whereas whenever you see a Balthus painting, and there's a figure walking away into the painting, that's supposed to be Balthus. This is the living room or the dining room. This is the dining room again. The movies outside there for break. I was thinking of that dessert buffet painting by Matisse. This is again Alice at Post for Eve, and she's reading an issue of Modern Painters. I think it's the article. It's on Damien Hirst, and the guy in the background actually lived across the street from us, and I sort of enlisted him and did everything. And this is funny how these things develop because they're, largely painted from the circumstances of the model in front of me, which is what I'm doing at this point. But what I did with the still life is I actually had a little studio in the back, and I set the still life up back there, and then actually moved that. So, but hopefully it was pretty continuous. This is Rachel Welling, who's BFA and her boyfriend Kelly. This is a larger painting. This isn't at 6 feet. This is about as big as I can paint. I don't remember exactly who said this, but I thought it was a funny quote. That they said, writing about art is like dancing about architecture. And that's a Frank Lloyd book on Frank Lloyd Wright. That's the Falling Water. This is another painting as Alice, and then this is a sketch, 16 by 20, and it was so hot out they were just practically fainting. But they toughed it out. I got this sketch, and then I had them pose in the studio, which was moderately successful in terms of being able to have them pose in this believable kind of way. But the thing was, it was not satisfying with the landscape. I just didn't know what to do about it, and I took it down the street and had the 2 easels up, and I was like painting it, and the usual stuff is they're just mulling over all sorts of nonsense. But that that idea, painting a larger painting where you're painting directly from the source, it's always a problem. This is the house on Lincoln Street again. The graduate student is standing there and getting the BFA. And you'll mind when was BFA. This is Hannah posted twice. This is a view of the court. Another view of the court. And the differences. And this is kind of a constructed, it's really not from our porch per se. It's kind of a constructed space. And I really did plot it out, using a 13 kind of perspective. And a variety of people posed. There's Allison sort of bending over there. The woman that sits even in the chair, it was actually her cat. She ran the cat for us so that I could paint it down. Side view of the yard. I know this name, which is probably from the series, maybe one of my favorites. And it's a funny thing, in terms of color and that stuff like that. I've used a variety of palettes at different points, and banishing earth colors. Never use black. I'm only going to use black. That kind of thing. What I find is that it makes almost no difference. And in fact, that green is mixed with green earth and cadmium iron. And in fact, the sunlight falling on the top of the deck there is sort of a reddish pinkish thing. That's Venetian rain. If you can imagine, we talked quite a bit in terms of ideas about things that are important to us in terms of paints. And one of the things that Eve has said that I really that's good is the idea of having bright darks in the sense that they become kind of positive colors. I was happy how that aspect of the thing turned out. This is the view out our kitchen. So I did a series of paintings that were mostly about me. And there's a point where I thought, well, maybe we could cast the net a little wider than that. And one thing I did is I did the show appearances, which again, is that kind of idea of the 16th and 17th century philosophy is like mostly portraits and people making appearances. And then Paint Town, which is a park near us, and then Social Contracts is the title. That comes from the kind of 17th and 18th century philosophy thing. That house, I said, remember the house with the porch? This is our neighbors, Carol and Victor, that posed for a portrait, and I traded them a little watercolor for them. So I set up in their alley. This is Lauren Stern and her mother. Lauren was a BFA, and she was holding a bar puppet. And her mom was opening a photography gallery in town. This is a portrait of the Isle of Sander. The Isle actually went through the entire program at IU. And so this is a family portrait. This is, again, the biggest painting is 6 feet. And then the other one that I said, remember this, is the VR with the political sign. This is named her daughter Rose. Malcolm Smith, who was in this next department, and his wife, Lynn Johnson, their son Owen, who is now, just graduating from high school. These are views of Paint Town, which is, again, a park near us. And they have a little marina line. And these are views of that. This is about 20 inches across. And this is a little fueling dock where boats get boat fuel. And this is another view of the fueling dock. Framed by these trees. And I thought to myself, that would be a good setting for a figure composition. And I ended up, I ended up actually going out to the park and we snap photos of each other on their cell phones. And I did a little drawing from those that got the poses in place. And I was able to roughly, grid that stuff by and turn it into this painting, which is a 6-foot square painting. And Ty Wilkinson, who was in our graduate program, very generously posed for this, and Holly Young. And how I did my car is they would come in and pose in the studio. And it was also a simple enough setting that I could, it was very separate between the landscape and the figures. But the car was a conundrum. And what I ended up doing was taking this 6-foot painting out into the parking lot where my studio was and parking the car and hiding the painting in the dumpster. It was an oncoming storm. This is the thing. It's around 40 inches. And I was really painting this on the side. And I would take out a full-size easel. And it was just an insane situation. Again, you turn your head for a second, the paint and the easel blow over. So it's very close to the point. And how I do construct these larger paintings at this point, I'm sort of doing something not so different from this, which is, and actually there are 2 variations for this painting. The one I showed earlier, the influence from the day, it's actually a different version of the painting. And but this is a dance studio, and the drawings that exist for many of these figures. And you can see what Degas has done is he's done this drawing and he's separated the paint. And you can see the grid happening, which is really important. One thing I just noticed is I was putting together the file lecture and I didn't notice this. This is what really where Degas like brilliant. But one of the things he added was the bows in the back of the dancers, which I think is really a nice touch. So anyway, this is what I was doing in this painting. This is a 16 by 20 study of a volleyball court in the park near the Lincoln Street House. This is the painting, which I'm not so crazy about, but I like the drawings very much. This is the pretty good size drawing of the poly. It's somewhere between 36 and 48 inches tall. And this is the figure hall, which is minuscule, actually, like that. And Brian Morgan, who posted the painting, and this figure, this whole going on. And I had this drawing in my studio, and I did a second painting of it. So here's another painting where I went through a similar sort of process. And I was, this is another lake in Bloomington called Lake Griffey. And what happens is I'm painting, and one of the BFA students went away. I'm buying it. And I did a little study. It wasn't a very memorable study, but it helped me. And so what I ended up doing is transferring into a larger canvas, which again is around 7 feet. And this is the transferring method I'm using. If you can see what I'm doing is I actually have a piece of acid tape that I put down over the setting, and I'm drawing up a grid. So anyway, but this is I'll use this method pretty frequently. And then you can see I'm actually, I don't know that I love the idea of painting this way, but I was doing a kind of careful charcoal drawing. And then working on top of that, here are some of the drawings that I did. And you can see where I'm actually, this is the grid after the thing has been initially set up. And I'm posing that on the surface and trying to get it in the right spot. And maybe I changed my mind a couple of times. That's where she's going. So this is me in process. And then this is the layer on the whole process. This is the both of them together, but this is the whole composition. Similar process for this one. So really on the other side of that bridge, and there's a little place where they rent rowboats and kayaks and canoes. And then I did a more involved study of that on the left, and then extended it with another panel. You can see a line right in the center. So it's actually two things that fit together. And what's in the foreground is actually a boat ramp that you back your boat down. And then I went around researching boats. Sort of an unexplained object in somebody's yard, and it's for sale. So so anyway, I did that one, and then found another one, and so I guess this one fit better for me somehow. And I ended up, putting them all together. I actually did a Photoshop collage where I fit them all together and was able to use that as basis. And I gridded that up, and we got printouts. And then Mitch was a graduate student post in my studio. And that's about 8 feet across. And this is from the first one I was showing you with the canoeist. This is basically 90 degrees to the right. And so, again, a 60 by 20 kind of study that gives me a bunch of information about things. Then I actually saw, a lot of things you end up seeing it and using. I actually saw this thing happen where there was obviously a couple and the man and a woman, and they had a joint compound bucket, and he was fishing and she was reading. And so what I did is I spent about 3 sessions each, and so Holly posed, and then Ted or Steve posed for this one. And again, I stitched them together into this painting. This is the show that's up in Pittsburgh right now, and I sort of call it the same prophet. And again, tabula rasa is one of those Enlightenment philosophy terms. It's what means blank slate. And it's kind of an optimistic term. It is one of those nature versus nurture kind of situations. And the idea is that things are not predetermined for you. It's that you're influenced by your surroundings, but you have the ability to kind of improve and change that. So this is the installation of the show in Pittsburgh right now. Another shot of the gallery. And just like any other, series of paintings that I've done is I'll go out and paint things that are ostensibly studies, but I don't necessarily know what's going to end up in the painting. There's this like a fishing dock from that area in town. And then this is from a picnic shelter. And this one I thought, oh, this could be a good setting for composition figures in it. And so this is Megan, who was on the Florence program with us for the summer. And this is her boyfriend. It's a funny thing, in terms of I mostly rely on the drawing of these studies when I'm painting. But I do remember with this one, I did this in one sitting, and I did have a reference photo that I was able to put on the TV, and then adjust a little bit. So, and then this is the finished painting, which is 6 feet across. And then these were some other paintings from the show. I actually did this spring, and I found there was a kind of a missing spot in the bigger painting, and I needed the information. But this is that area. And then these were some other paintings I did. These lakes really flood, and you can see, where the trees are really set in the water. These are, I guess, this is a smaller little painting of the woods, a little tree in the edge of the lake. And this is a study for probably what I'm going to be working on next. A tree that it's still living, but it's sort of just fallen down the bank. It's kind of practically horizontal. And so I got Corey composed. This is another 36-inch one. And I didn't have much information in the top of the body, so I did this one. And I think I'll probably start this anyway. So that's it.
All right, thank you.
Thanks, Jim. It's awesome to see you. I have a question about communities. Can you talk a little bit more about the relationship between your interest in American history and your current work?
Just it is something I'm interested in. That was just an interest of time. I didn't go back to school, but I had a really excellent AP history teacher who was nuts. But it was really, this was before Xerox. I don't want to be prescriptive or explicit when I have, it informed my thinking about stuff, but I don't want to be too didactic about stuff. There's a great book that was written in the 70s by Fran Lebowitz. called Metropolitan Lion. She's somebody that's famous for writer's block, but she had these great quips in it, and one of them was, "I wouldn't be part of a political philosophy that could fit on a t-shirt."
So I'm also really interested in that question of like, how do you know what is reality? Like, where is reality? What is reality within that philosophical question? But then also it's important for a painter, for any artist. And then in your beginning work, I was kind of thinking, well, how do you ground that in reality? You know, the abstract and reality. And then with this, I kind of, you know, your present work, how do you insert your imagination into reality without manipulating it too far?
Yeah, I know it's this problem. I mean, you know, I guess it's one of those things that any of those like 18th century philosophers and stuff. At a certain point, we do have to. At least my conclusion is that I have to accept some sense of the existence of the world. And I mean, so some of them get really wacky. So I've gotten this word, well, I'll trust tangible things. And I've gone through periods where, you know, I was teaching at IU where these are kind of late influences of people that I'm interested in. It's people like Lopez Garcia, who's, again, is nuts. And we would bring students in to watch this movie that the Dreams liked, you know, on a tiny TV. It's the feet of the master. And there's a point where I was meeting with online. Some of the still lives are not that one. In terms of the imagination thing in general, I mean, I guess I do. I suppose I come back to the thing I trust the most is quotidian reality around me, and maybe trying to find something miraculous. But it's quite good. I recognize it.
Your pictures remind me of photographs. Don't you ever just use a photograph to redo the thing? Because you pose a lot of subjects.
99% of the time, no. I mean, I either paint from a study that I have, or the actual situation where I get them to pose over the pose. And I sometimes wonder why I'm doing that. But even with the larger paintings that I've done recently, the thing I have projected up on the TV screen is a painting and or it's a drawing.
Thinking about what you see students receiving in your position as a professor, what would you tell students are the strengths and weaknesses of, in general, the art education system you see around you? Like, what would students have to be aware of that you receive that maybe they didn't receive?
You know, the whole, you know, ethos, you know, when I was a student in the 70s and stuff was basically like, you know, figure it out yourself. And there's some wisdom in it because you do figure it out yourself in lots of ways. On the other hand, that was maybe such a crazy process or such a, you know, the imaginative kinds of things and that kind of thing. I don't know that I can sort of, I can tell people what I like or I'm interested in and stuff like that, but I can't make those decisions with people. But I mean, I do, you know, from the drawing class, I'm just telling you mostly about, you know, trying to get you to see things in a particular kind of way. And, but again, it sort of does boil down to stuff that you see and experience and trying to glom onto that in the clearest way possible. So, that makes sense? Okay.
Thank you, Jen. Thank you.